This is Nasha Kasha, Ukrainian Almanac. 28 minutes of stories for everyone about Ukrainian life. I'm your reporter, Stefan Andrusiak. This is episode 276, and it was recorded in Ottawa. Ottawa is Canada's capital. It sits on the eastern border of the province of Ontario, on the Ottawa River, next to Gatineau in Quebec. It has at its center Parliament Hill. The park-lined Rideau Canal offers boating in summer, ice skating in winter. It's mid-September. Post-secondary classes are beginning at the University of Ottawa, Carleton University, and at Algonquin College. Back in the day, having earned my own BA in Montreal, I enrolled at Carleton University. I rented a room a short bus ride away. When I wasn't in a hurry to get to class, I walked. I found my first real job while studying at Carleton. It launched my professional career in journalism. That time in my life was filled with potential that was seasoned with ample doses of both excitement and uncertainty. Now, decades later, I wanted to record the voices of those who were at that exact phase in their lives, finishing school, finding work. So I asked around, and to my delight, a contact recommended the granddaughter of my former landlady. Her name is Anhelina, and yes, Anhelina would bring a friend. We met at the Chateau Laurier Hotel next to Parliament Hill. We found a nook on the mezzanine level, and we made our introductions.
My name is Anhelina Ostapik. I'm a fifth-year anthropology student at the University of Ottawa. I'm of Ukrainian heritage on both sides of my family, and I was born and raised in Ottawa, currently still living here.
So this is your hometown?
Yes, exactly. It's my hometown.
The capital of Canada?
Absolutely, the nation's capital.
My name is Marc. I am a resident of Ottawa. I was born in the States and raised in the States in New York. I came to Montreal for university and graduated this April, and here I am in the nation's capital.
When you say New York, do you mean the state or the city?
I was born in the city, but as a very young child, I moved to the suburbs just outside the city.
So on my Tato's side, both of my grandparents are Ukrainian. My Baba was born in the western part of Ukraine. The borders were changing at that point, so it might have been Poland, but she was definitely Ukrainian, and she was about 16 years old. World War II started, and she was taken away by German officers to go work on a farm in Germany. And then when the war ended, she ended up in a displaced persons camp in Belgium, which is where she met my Jido. And then after a few years, they came over to Ottawa. It was on Christmas Eve that they landed in Ottawa. And the next day, my Jido was out shoveling snow. It was his first job on Christmas Day.
Job as in he was hired to do it?
I'm not sure if he was hired, but...
That was his task. Yes, I've experienced the beauty of Ottawa winters.
Yeah, definitely very snowy.
Yeah, and people think Winnipeg is cold. Ha!
Yeah, well, we're the valley, so we get all of the storms.
Нічого спала, хто ж зимою робить? Спить озеро, спить ліс і очерет. Верба рипіла, все засни, засни. І снилися мені всі білі сни. Я спала, дихали так вільно груди, по білих снах рожеві гадки. Легенькі гаптували мережки, і ткались золото-блакитні, спокійні, не такі, тихі, не такі, як літні.
I currently live and I grew up in the south of Ottawa, which is Manotick, but now it's actually part of the city of Ottawa. And so it's very rural there, increasingly suburban, just on the outskirts of Manotick. I really enjoyed being able to live in Ottawa and kind of remove myself from the downtown core and be in like a more calm environment. The green belt in Ottawa and like all of the green space is very lovely and something that I haven't seen in other Canadian cities to the same extent.
Я спала дихали так вільно груди. Я спала, дихали так вільно груди.
This is the artist who simply calls herself Shy, here in collaboration with Irena Kolchenko. It's a song inspired by Lesya Ukrainka's poem Lisova Pisnya about human awakening after a harsh winter.
So I have Ukrainian heritage strictly on my father's side. Both of his parents were born in what is now Lvivska Oblast, but then I think in both cases they were born technically in Poland. They didn't really talk about the war period at all. I imagine that there was a lot of trauma there and that was a harsh period, but they ended up in a displaced persons camp in Germany and then came directly to New York after that.
Brothers, sisters?
I have one older brother, correct, yeah.
And what was growing up in New York like?
Yeah, well, it's nice. One of my favorite things about it is the public transportation. So even though I was in the suburbs, you're just a train ride away from Manhattan, and you can get anywhere you need to go rather quickly. So I really appreciate that. I didn't do any formal schooling in the city, so I did K through 12 in the suburbs in Westchester County. There definitely are a lot of Ukrainians in New York, although it is such a big city that the Ukrainian community does feel relatively small in comparison. Compared to, the cities I've lived in Canada, Montreal, and in Ottawa, I find that I've met a lot of Ukrainians here, even more Ukrainians than I did in the States. But that could also be related to the fact that I've done more things in the Ukrainian community since coming here to Canada compared to when I was there in New York.
My Tato had a landscaping company for quite some time. He's retired now, but still doing some landscaping, renovation work all over the place. For my Tato, it's an instinct being able to do those things. For me, it's not common sense at all, but he just has a natural touch with that sort of thing.
A natural green thumb.
My mom works for the city of Ottawa. She's a cultural arts and initiatives manager.
Brothers, sisters?
I have an older sister, 4 years older than me. Growing up, I was very involved in the Ottawa Ukrainian community. When I was younger, it was like a more of like a cultural sense, traditional sense. We would celebrate the different holidays. I would take Ukrainian Christmas off. I wouldn't go to school for that.
That was like a birthright. All kids took advantage whether you were celebrating or not, right? Extra day off.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. We had 2 Christmases, 2 Easters, double the presents.
You're listening to the 4-part harmonies of the Husli Men's Choir from Winnipeg. This carol is simply called Wondrous News.
I was very involved in Ukrainian dance growing up, the Ottawa School of Ukrainian Dance, and now I'm a Svitonok ensemble dancer. But throughout my university years, I got more involved in other organizations, such as UNF.
The Ukrainian National Federation.
That's a recent one. I'm president of the Ottawa Ukrainian Students Club. I've been involved in that since the start of my university education. And I'm always trying to look for ways to get more involved in the community because it's the way I feel connected to my roots and the way that I maintain that connection to my ancestors and my heritage.
Ой, на горі вітер дув, ночі любку мене був, черевички поцював, мене личко цілував. А калина не верба, там дівчина молода. А калина не верба, там дівчина молода.
Ukrainian dance, I've been doing it since I was 3 years old, and it's helped me in so many areas of my life. It's like my social connection. I'm getting emotional here because we haven't been doing dance for the past year and a half. It's been really tough.
Ой, ви мене, ой, ріж мене, а загріться, вітай мене, я загріцем сокочу, не віда сама течу. А калина не верба, там дівчина молода.
As a group, as a Svitonok dance ensemble, we've gone to Montreal Ukrainian Festival. We're looking at larger trips in the future, potentially to Ukraine, potentially to other parts of Europe, maybe down south. It's all in the works, but unfortunately the pandemic happened. So that sort of planning has been put on pause. My parents, however, when they were in the dance group, 20, 30 years ago. They traveled all over the world. They went to Ukraine a few times. Actually, during 1991, they were flying to Ukraine with the dance troupe at that point. And when they landed, it was a free Ukraine. And they were the first Ukrainian dance group to perform in a free Ukraine. And everyone was like, oh, you should have come sooner. You brought us independence.
Там дівчина молода, а калина не верба. Там дівчина молода, а калина не верба. Там дівчина молода.
This is the band Shum. It means a whole lot of noise. From their second album, It's Fun to Be Ukrainian, an homage to the cranberry, A Kalina Neverba. Ukrainian electro-folk band Onuka. Onuka means granddaughter. Yevhen Filatov, Nana Zhishchenko. Their composition is about hope and a city. It's called Misto. Nasha Kasha comes to you from CHRW 94.9 FM on the campus of Western University in London, Ontario. We're heard on CHMR 93.5 FM in St. John's, Newfoundland, on CKDU 88.1 FM in Halifax, on Local 107.3 FM in St. John, New Brunswick, on CJAS Radio 93.5 FM in Saint Augustine, Quebec, on CJLO 1690 AM in Montreal, on CFRC 101.9 FM in Kingston, on CFMU 93.3 FM in Hamilton, on CKMS 102.7 FM in Kitchener-Waterloo, on CJAM 99.1 FM in Windsor and Detroit, on CKLU 96.7 FM in Sudbury, on CILU 102.7 FM in Thunder Bay, on 101.5 UMFM in Winnipeg, on CJTR 91.3 FM in Regina, on CFMQ 98.1 FM in Hudson Bay, Saskatchewan, on CFBX 92.5 FM in Kamloops, on CJSF 90.1 FM in Vancouver, and on CHLY 101.7 FM in Nanaimo, British Columbia.
Свою надію, даю надію. Даю надію, і знову дію.
I finished my degree at McGill University. I actually did 2 degrees. I completed 2, one in economics and one in Latin American studies, of all things. Since I started my degree, I had a really strong interest in development economics, so understanding the economies of developing countries and different solutions to poverty and lack of access to things like healthcare and education. And so it's really, really competitive to find work in that field, and usually people need masters and PhDs. It's something that I still have a strong interest in and potentially pursuing in the future, but at the moment, I'm not working in that area. I did economics because I've always been really interested in the social sciences. I would always read about history and people and societies, but I also really liked math, so it ended up working out really nicely. I really enjoyed that program. And I've always also been interested in languages. So when I was in high school, I mean, I've been in a constant state of learning Ukrainian, right, for connecting to my family and to my roots. But I also picked up some Spanish and Portuguese along the way, and I wanted to be able to continue with that at the university level. And as a student, since my academics weren't really focused on Ukraine, McGill has really nothing related to Ukraine academically. There is a Slavic studies program, but it's almost all Russian studies. And so I was involved with the McGill Ukrainian Students Association for 3 years, and then casually in my first year, but for the last 3 years I was more involved. And I also got involved in the Ukrainian Canadian Students Union, just to, like Anhelina said, I'm also really interested in getting as involved as I can in the community, and I'm very glad that I had that experience.
You spoke of strong Ukrainian roots on your father's side. Did I get that correct? What other cultural influences do you have in your family?
So on my father's side, both of his parents immigrated from Ukraine, or I guess what is now Ukraine. And on my mother's side, her parents immigrated from France.
Do you speak French?
Quite well. I spent more time with my mom as a very young child, and then I took French in school. So my French has always been at a higher level than my Ukrainian, but I haven't had to put as much effort into the French. It came more naturally, I think, because I was more exposed to it when I was young. I was exposed to Ukrainian too, but just not as significantly. So that's been more of an effort, and as I think a lot of people listening to this podcast could understand, the grammar is a challenge for someone who didn't grow up speaking it natively. I really enjoy the learning process, and it's nice to be able to understand more and more of what people are saying in Ukrainian.
Have you been to France? Do you have thoughts about it?
I've been to France twice. I went once when I was very young, and I don't remember that too well, and then I went once in, I believe, 2018. Which was nice because at that point my French proficiency was pretty high, so I was able to speak to my family members that didn't really know any English, which was definitely motivating.
Oksana Mucha, singing I Regret Nothing.
I was actually interested in journalism in my later years of high school. I wanted to learn more about the cultural aspect of groups of people. And I took a course in grade 11. That was anthropology, psychology, and sociology. And I remember being fascinated learning about evolution and all that stuff. So that's when I entered into anthropology and migration and diaspora studies. I wonder where I got that from, probably my family history. So I'm actually considering a few master's programs right now. There's a migration and diaspora studies program at Carleton. I'm also considering Canadian and Indigenous studies because I'm very motivated to work with minority groups and help them, whether that be the First Peoples on our land or new immigrants, refugees, helping them with integrating into our society. So I really want to work with people and help them.
When you talk about diaspora studies, is that integration while maintaining your values and traditions?
That's one aspect of it. It's definitely complicated. Something I'm hoping to learn about during my studies, yeah.
Student life, both of you are involved in SUSC. Did you walk by a table at registration and somebody waved you over, or how did you get involved in the club?
When I was about to go to McGill, my dad told me, it's like, I have an old friend from New Jersey and her kid went to McGill and she's in like a Ukrainian club there. I was like, cool, I'm going into university. I want to get involved socially and professionally. So I contacted them almost right away. And conveniently, that was at the time that the 2017 Montreal Ukrainian Festival was going on. So that was a nice welcome to the city. So after 2 years, I was elected president, so my third year of university. And somebody who had been in the club previously told me about the SUSC Congress happening later that year, and I'd never heard of SUSC before. And so I just went on my own. It was in Winnipeg. I just kind of showed up. It seemed interesting, and I would be able to make connections that would potentially benefit me as president of the club going forward. And I ended up being very correct in that assumption because I met some amazing people, including Anhelina here, and I got a lot more connected to the Ukrainian student community and got involved in the executive board.
And SUSC is the Ukrainian University Students' Union of Canada. Is that the proper?
Yeah, Ukrainian Canadian Students' Union. The SUSC comes from, I think it's Союз Українського студентства Канади.
So my sister, she was at university before me, and she was involved with the club, so I was very aware of it. I became involved in my second year or halfway through my first year of university, and somehow ended up being co-president for 2 years, and going into my final year of undergraduate, I'll be the president. Yeah, so sort of similar as Marc, I was encouraged to go to the SUSC Congress in Winnipeg. This was in 2019, I believe. making connections with people and learning what other clubs were doing. Having that hands-on learning experience, going to presentations and seminars, really influenced my ability to serve as a co-president in a better way.
So your parents showed up in Ukraine with their dance group the month that it found independence. You're interested in diaspora studies. You're interested in developmental studies. Do you have any thoughts on this time in history where we are 30 years after your parents landed there and danced for this nation, one that was revitalized but had been under communist rules for so many years?
I think that even though Ukraine has independence, we still need to advocate for its independence. It's still being threatened culturally, politically, socially on its eastern borders. There's also like an information warfare happening, and I think that there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of Ukraine's sovereignty.
Іди, синку, іди прич од мене, нехай тебе москаль візьме. Гей, мене, мамо, мене й москаль знає, жить під себе підбиває. Гей, мене, мамо, мене й москаль знає, жить під себе підбиває. Вернись, синку, вернись додомоньку, змию тобі голівоньку. Гей, мені, мамо, мені змиють дощі, а розчешуть густі терна. Гей, мені, мамо, мені змиють дощі, а розчешуть густі терна. Гей, мені, мамо, мені змиють дощі, а розвіють буйні.
Part of a song by Taras Chubayan Kozak system, Hominy, the Roar. It's a conversation between a warrior's son and his mother about Ukraine's invaders throughout the ages, the most relentless of whom come from Moscow.
Looking at things from an economic perspective, I think that the thing that will cause the greatest difference in Ukraine's economy over the next decades, I think, is the elimination of corruption within the political system. And so you've seen that in the last 30 years, after recovering from how many years of communist rule. I think that the more Ukraine looks to its allies in the West and follows that model, kind of deflects from the East, you'll see a lot of progress politically and economically in the country.
When you look at Latin American countries, there are corrupt rules there. I'm not saying all of them, but in their history, they certainly experienced it. What lessons learned there can be applied to Ukraine?
I think that looking at the Latin American model, it's not particularly optimistic in the sense that it shows a reality that when a country is faced with issues of corruption, it is very challenging and it takes a very long time to wither away at that. And it's not something that can be done instantly or over the course of a decade or even two. But that does provide a framework for looking at the future and seeing things from a very long-term perspective as opposed to having over-optimistic expectations. Helps keep things realistic and will help, I think, world leaders and leaders in Ukraine make progress over the long term. I feel very welcomed in the Ukrainian-Canadian community, here in Canada specifically. I found that in the U.S., I was involved with some Ukrainian things and I really enjoyed it, but I found that as somebody who doesn't speak the language fluently, I feel like I fit in the community here still very strongly, whereas in the States, at least in New York, I felt like that did create a bit more of a divide that I don't see as much here. So I'm just really happy that I got involved when I came to Canada, and that there's still, even though I've graduated university, there are still so many opportunities for me to stay involved. So I'm just very grateful. I find that the youth here, the Ukrainian youth in Canada, is so motivated and so engaged that as a young person of Ukrainian descent in Canada, I have no worries or anxiety about the state of the diaspora going forward. I think that there's some amazing things to come in the future. So I'm very, very optimistic about that.
That's good to hear from someone who grew up on the other side of the border. I mean, our cultures are quite similar, Canada and the United States, but there are some marked differences, and for you to come here and find that kind of optimism is quite special.
A lot of people that I've met who are from Ukraine, people that I've met at McGill who grew up speaking Russian at home, have now switched entirely to speaking Ukrainian with their families and other Ukrainians, and the identity is being solidified over time, and I think that that's only going to continue to strengthen.
Ukraine needs to strengthen the Ukrainian language within its actual country. I feel it's one of the best ways to ensure that, you know, the Ukrainian culture, traditions, heritage, Ukraine keeps its own identity and removes as much Russian influence as possible.
Here's Nadia Yanchuk promoting the Ukrainian language.
Українська мова, мова барвінкова, в лузі запашнім, квітка польова, поруч ти зі мною, чаруєш красою, у серцях гарячих ти жива. Мова стоплива, дзвінка і грайлива, мелодійна пенька, сонячна пуста, веселково ніжна, і розкішна, лікуєш серце і уста. Мова лебедина, ти одна єдина, ти як соловейка, пісня у гаю. Мова калинова, дивна загадкова, рідну свою мову я люблю.
Nasha Kasha is supported in part by the Shevchenko Foundation and the Ukrainian Credit Union. New Pathway Ukrainian News delivers news and insight every week in English and Ukrainian. Subscribe today at newpathway.ca. Back in a week, God willing. До милої зустрічі за тиждень часу, дорогі слухачі.
Мова калинова, дивна загадкова, рідну свою мову